Ever notice how we kind of get caught up in the do this, then that of recipes? Like the
Mm.
steps, sure, those are important. But what about the core elements that actually make the food sing?
Oh, for sure. It's like focusing on the notes without grasping the melody, the harmony, the rhythm that makes it all come together.
That's it. Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. Today, we're going deeper than usual into your shared source, Samin Nosrat's Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. This book, seriously, it's a game changer for anyone, whether you're a seasoned chef or just trying to make dinner less sad.
And that's exactly our mission here. We're going to break down how these four elements, they're not just ingredients, they're like the fundamental forces of flavor. Like Rebecca Skloot called it a culinary compass. How cool is that?
Love that analogy. And Samin herself, her story is so inspiring. Growing up with Persian food, then that time at Ches Panisse, I mean, she went from not knowing cumin, from fennel to cooking for the First Lady. It's proof that anyone can master this stuff.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting is her emphasis on developing your palate. It's not just about following instructions, it's about tasting, understanding, and adjusting as you go. It's like she's a real champion for hands-on learning in the kitchen.
By the end of this deep dive, we want you to feel like you can break free from those recipe shackles, to trust your gut, your taste buds, and really grasp what makes food delicious. All right, let's start with the OG flavor enhancer.
Salt. Salt, man. It's more than just salty, right? It's like the secret weapon that unlocks all these other flavors hiding in your food. Have you ever tasted broth before you add salt? It's kind of bland, almost lifeless. But a pinch of salt, boom, suddenly it's all fireworks.
It's like it wakes everything up. And in the book, Seaman gets into the different types of salt, something I hadn't really thought about before, like granular salt, those little dense cubes. She says those are best for seasoning from within.
Exactly. Those denser crystals dissolve quickly, so they're perfect for stuff like pasta water or even mixing right into doughs and brines. Then you've got your flakier salts like Malden or Fleur de Sel. Those are the delicate show-off types.
Those are for the final sprinkle, that extra pop of flavor. She makes good point about keeping both on hand, the workhorse and the artist, both essential. So granular for the foundation, flake for the finishing touch. Makes sense.
And it's fascinating how salt actually gets into food. Like with meat, it's mostly diffusion, those salt particles spreading out through the muscle. Then there's osmosis, where water moves around to balance things out. So that's why seasoning meat ahead of time is so key. It gives the salt time to do its thing.
Yeah, she stresses time over quantity when it comes to meat. A little bit of salt early on makes a huge difference. But then, wait, she flips the script with seafood, right?
Totally. Fish, it's a different beast. That delicate protein structure, if you salt it too early, you basically suck all the moisture out. You end up with tough, rubbery fish. So for those flaky types like cod or tilapia, a quick salt just before cooking, maybe 15-20 minutes tops. Denser fish like tuna, you can go a bit longer. But the point is, less is more with seafood when it comes to salting ahead of time.
Makes sense. Now, salt needs water to work its magic, right? So how does that play out with fat in the equation?
Okay, so salt can't just dissolve in pure fat, right? But most fats we cook with, they've got a bit of water hanging around. Like butter's got some moisture, marinades usually have some liquid. Even the food itself has water. So that little bit of water, it's like the bridge that lets the salt dissolve and do its thing. That's why seasoning early with fatty stuff is a good move. Or, like Samin suggests, if you're making a vinaigrette, dissolve the salt in the vinegar first. Gets it all spread out nicely.
And she mentions this interesting thing about fatty cuts of meat, like prosciutto, where the leaner bits get saltier faster. Never thought about that.
It's all about how different parts of the same ingredient react to salt. The lean muscle, more water, so salt gets in quicker. Fat, less water, slower salt absorption. Her tip to just taste both parts and adjust at the table? Genius. That's using your senses, people.
Speaking of, what about our veggie and bean lovers out there?
Salt, it's a softening agent. For dried beans, soak them or start cooking them with salt. Gets the flavor all in there. But watch out with grains, like rice or quinoa, she warns. They absorb all that cooking liquid, so you don't want to go overboard with the salt.
So basically, it all comes back to learning to salt to taste, like she keeps saying, paying attention, seeing how that pinch of salt transforms the whole dish.
Absolutely. You are the master of your taste buds. She even mentions Marcella Hazan, this legendary chef who could tell if something needed salt just by smelling it. Like, imagine that level of sensory awareness.
And remember, adding salt is way easier than taking it away. Those Ches Panisse stories about the forgotten salt in the pizza dough, oh man, the heartbreak. Undersalted chicken, lasagna. It's a good reminder to season properly from the start.
Those stories, they stick with you. And Semin breaks it down to 3 simple questions about salt. When? How much? What kind? That, she says, becomes your roadmap for improvisation. Pretty powerful, huh? All right, ready for the next big player? Fat.
Let's do it. Fat, often demonized, but Sam is like, hold up, fat's the MVP. It's not just one of the 4 elements, it's literally a building block of food itself. It gives us energy, helps us absorb nutrients, even keeps our brains happy.
Yeah, we got to move past this whole fat is bad thing. Of course, too much of anything is a bad thing. But healthy fats, especially from plants and fish, they're essential. And in cooking, well, fat is like salt's partner in crime. It brings so much to the table.
No kidding. First off, flavor. Different fats, different flavors. That story of the tomato sauce tasting completely different depending on the olive oil, that was eye-opening.
It's crazy how much the quality of your ingredients affects the final dish. And Semin has this cool idea of a flavor wheel for fats, like butter for French cuisine, ghee for Indian, sesame oil for Chinese. It helps you think about pairing the right fat with the flavors you're going for.
Genius. But beyond flavor, fat is a texture magician. It can create crispness, creaminess, flakiness, tenderness, even lightness. Let's start with crispiness. Everyone loves a good crunch, right?
So crispness, it's all about water evaporating. And that happens best above the boiling point of water, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the key here. It gets the heat to the food evenly, letting the surface get super hot and drive off that moisture. Think searing a steak, sautéing veggies, deep frying fries. Fries.
Oh, yeah. Now, what about smoke points? That can be confusing. So, like, refined oils can handle more heat than olive oil or butter, right?
You got it. Refined oils like grapeseed or canola, they have higher smoke points, so they're good for high heat stuff like deep frying. Unrefined fats like extra virgin olive oil or butter, they burn easier, so medium heat is best for them. That way, you get their unique flavor without burning them. And her tips for getting that perfect crispness, like a hot pan, not overcrowding, and managing the heat, those are golden.
All right, on to creaminess. Fat is the backbone of emulsions. Those mixtures of oil and water that normally wouldn't get along, like mayonnaise or vinaigrettes.
Mayonnaise, that's the classic oil and water emulsion. And it's all thanks to lecithin in egg yolk. This little molecule, it's got one end that loves fat and one end that loves water, so it acts like a bridge holding everything together. But she warns us, emulsions can break if you're not careful.
And then there's flakiness and tenderness in baking, which seem opposite, but are both influenced by how we use fat. So interesting.
Right, fat is so versatile. For tender shortbread, you want the fat mixed in really well, often softened or melted butter. This keeps the gluten, that stretchy protein, from making things tough. But for flaky pastry, you want cold, solid fat in little pieces. When that hits the oven heat, bam, the water in the fat turns to steam and creates those lovely layers.
Then you have Aaron Hyman's tart dough, which tries to get both flakiness and tenderness. That's like the dream, right?
Oh, yeah. He's playing with fat at different temperatures and with other ingredients to get that perfect balance. And finally, there's lightness, especially in cakes. Using oil instead of butter coats the flour proteins, so less gluten forms, which makes the cake super tender and moist, like a carrot cake or olive oil cake. Yum.
It's amazing how much fat does for texture and flavor. Okay, next up, acid.
Acid. Samin describes it as a gradual awakening for her. Like, she grew up with sour flavors in Persian cuisine, sumac, torshi, sour oranges, yogurt. It wasn't just about sourness, it was about how acid lifted the whole dish.
That Thanksgiving dinner story she tells, that was really relatable. How she used a touch of acid in every element, the mashed potatoes, the gravy, even the stuffing. It kept everything from feeling heavy and kept your palate engaged.
It's like acid cleanses the palate as you eat. And while pure acid is just sour, the flavors we love come from how the acid is made, like grapes fermented into vinegar, milk cultured into yogurt, cheese aged for months. And she points out that even within the same ingredient, acidity can vary, like different vinegars or even oranges from different places.
And she talks about using the flavor of acid intentionally to guide the direction of a dish, like preserved lemons for Moroccan lamb, white wine for French sauces, red wine vinegar for Greek food. It's like acid is a flavor compass.
It totally is. She gives this example of cabbage slaw, mustard and cider vinegar, that's Southern, lime and cilantro, that screams Mexican, rice wine vinegar with scallions and peanuts, that's Southeast Asia. It's about choosing an acid that matches the overall flavor you want.
Besides flavor, acid does some cool stuff for appearance and texture, too.
Right, like acid prevents oxidation, so lemon juice keeps your apple slices from browning or guacamole from turning green. But it also affects texture. In veggies and beans, acid slows down the softening process. That's why you saute onions before adding tomatoes. If you add them together, the onions might not soften properly.
Good tip. And with doughs and batters, acid can make things tender by messing with that gluten network.
Yeah.
But if you want a chewier texture, she says add the acid later.
And with meat and fish, acid does some funky stuff to the proteins. It unwinds them and then over time makes them clump together. This is how ceviche works. Acid cooks the fish. Marinating meat in acid can tenderize it, but she warns, too long and it can get tough.
I love how she talks about balancing and layering acids, like using balsamic and red wine vinegar together.
Yeah.
And using the same acid during cooking and as a finishing touch like a squeeze of lemon, that creates a layered flavor experience.
Oh, yeah. And she even brings up umami, that savory deliciousness factor, and how it works with acid. She quotes Alice Waters saying a salad needed more acid even though it tasted good. It's because acid cuts through richness and brightens other flavors, even if you already have umami in there.
And that brings us to the importance of acid for balancing a whole meal, especially with richer foods. Those examples she gives, using salt, fat, and acid to evoke different cuisines like Indian with yogurt and lime, or Sicilian with lemon and red wine vinegar, or even a classic Cobb salad with its vinaigrette. It shows how these three elements work together. Now, onto the final element, heat.
Heat is where it all comes together. Samin makes a great point here. The best cooks, they don't just stare at the timer or thermometer. They pay attention to the food itself, using their senses, their eyes, their nose, their hands to guide them.
She talks about working backward with heat, which is so smart. Like, think about the end result you want, the texture, the appearance, creamy mashed potatoes versus crispy roasted potatoes. Then you choose your heat based on that.
It's about having a vision and then knowing how different types of heat will get you there. And Samin explains how different mediums, like water, affect food. A gentle water bath for custards, a simmer for tougher meats, braising for even more tenderizing. But she also points out that water can dehydrate, which is important to remember when freezing stuff.
And steam, it's not just hot air. It changes the texture of veggies, makes them translucent, and really brings out their flavor. She talks about controlling steam by how tightly you pack food and the shape of your pan.
And she connects it back to salt, explaining how salt can actually draw out moisture from veggies, creating more steam. Then she dives into proteins, how they cook differently at different temperatures. Tender cuts like quick, high heat, while tougher cuts need low and slow to break down that connective tissue.
And of course, there's browning, the Maillard reaction. That's heat's biggest contribution to flavor. It's like magic turning bread into toast, raw fish into seared tuna. Those chemical reactions are pure flavor gold.
But browning, it's a balancing act, as Samin says. Too much heat and you burn it. Not enough heat and it's bland and overcooked. That caramel sauce example she gives is perfect. A few extra minutes on the stove can make a huge difference. And she reminds us that different heat sources, like stovetop versus oven, give different results.
And then there's smoking, which adds those amazing smoky flavors from wood.
Yeah, smoking is a whole other level of flavor. And when it comes to choosing gentle versus intense heat, it depends on your goal. Do you want to create tenderness or preserve it? Tender foods need less cooking, often at higher heat. Tougher foods need longer, gentler cooking. And browning usually needs a combination, like searing, then finishing in the oven.
And her final point about heat is to let go of the timer and thermometer and trust your senses. Pay attention to what you see, smell, hear, and feel. She wants us to use recipes as guides, but to ultimately cook based on what our senses tell us.
It's about developing that intuition, that connection with the food, which makes you a more confident and adaptable cook.
So wrapping up this deep dive into Samin Nosrat's salt, fat, acid, heat, the takeaway is this. Mastering these four elements is the key to cooking intuitively and deliciously. It's about understanding the why, not just the what.
Now you have a deeper understanding of these elements and how they create the food we love. Hopefully this inspires you to go forth and experiment in your own kitchen.
We encourage you to play with these concepts. See how different types of salt, fat, and acid change your dishes. Watch how different heat levels transform your ingredients.
That's where the real learning happens, by doing, by tasting, by experimenting.
So here's a final thought. Which of these four elements are you most curious about now? Which one are you excited to play with? Maybe this week, try improvising a dish, focusing on balancing these elements without sticking to a recipe. Tell us about your discoveries. Until our next deep dive, happy cooking.